Okay, everybody. Thank you very much for all being here. Good afternoon. I'll just remind everyone where we are in the process and the plan for today. We've finished hearing from submitters and received all of the written submissions. We are about to hear from the staff who will present the thematic analysis. After that, we will go briefly into PX to receive some legal advice. When we come out of PX, staff will be looking for direction and any amendments. We will be doing formal resolutions for this. By the end of the day, staff would like to have all the information they need for the final policy. When we will then close the meeting, because this is just an extension of the other meeting we had, staff will create the LAP and it will be presented to us at a future council meeting to adopt. So staff, I invite you back to the table, but you're already there. So fire away, good to see you again.
Good afternoon.
Yeah,
you just talked about.
Yeah, far away.
At the adoption meeting at the end, are we able to make amendments at that point? I don't know if we need to or want to, but I'm just asking if we don't like the final look of the day. Yeah.
No, prefer we didn't. Yes.
So today is a decision-making meeting, and the other one's rubber stamping.
That's correct. Yes. It'd be nice to have it all
isn't it?
Yeah, you're nailed down today, so it's just rubber stamping next time. If we can.
A report would come back to council for adoption.
I'd say technically though, I mean that's the preferred thing, but technically when a paper comes to a council meeting, you could put up an amendment. It just would make it messy.
Yes, it would be nice. Yes.
Yeah, it would be nice if we could get amendments.
The floor is yours.
Thanks. Thank you. So we'll start off with a bit of a recap on the previous decision council made around the LAP. So that was in April, and you decided to go out and consult for the special consultative procedure for the LAP with a couple of amendments that were made at that meeting on the day regarding the sensitive sites provision. So that was around restricting the sensitive sites to bottle stores only and applying a distance of 50 metres in the Banks Peninsula to sensitive sites as well. So that is what agreed and what we consulted on. As you can see on this slide, we're coming to the back end of the LAP process. And so since the start of this project, we've engaged and continued to communicate with a range of key stakeholders, including supermarkets, hospitality, New Zealand, retailers, clubs, police, Health New Zealand. You'll remember that we had questions in the Life in Christchurch survey where we got over 4,000 responses. We did a early pre-consultation engagement survey as well, where we got nearly 3,500 responses to that. We've collected data from the police, Health New Zealand and others and developed a research report, met with community boards, did a webinar. And really all of this is just to say that where we've got to today in regards to the draft LAP is the result of a lot of engagement and analysis, and the draft LAP does reflect this. Just zooming in a little bit on the final steps of the project. So today we are presenting to you the results of the consultation as part of the SCP. And the outcome we are seeking, as the Mayor mentioned, as councillors to provide us with policy preferences for a final report. That report will ask council to finalise the LAP, and if you do finalise it, it will then be publicly notified, and then formally adopted, technically 30 days later as under the statute, and then will come into force, which is the commencement up there. And just to note, there are two different dates that this would come into force. So for policies 2 and 3, which is around the areas of deprivation and sensitive sites, they come into force once the LAP is adopted 30 days after notification or any other date we choose, with the trading hours that is no earlier than 3 months to give time for retailers to make adjustments accordingly. So if we sort of continue on our current path and current plan, that'll be sort of late August for policies 2 and 3, and then late October for policy 1 coming into place. Before we get into the details around the, just a quick reminder of the policies that we consulted on. Policy 1 was reducing all off licenses across the district to close at 9 p.m. daily. This is to restrict late night purchases of alcohol and around concerns around unsupervised drinking when unsupervised consumption of alcohol when people are drinking. And the rationale is around, as for this one, is around the accessibility and availability of alcohol, reducing trading hours, therefore reducing harm, and also noting that most alcohol harm occurs at night time or in the early hours of the morning, according to the data. Policy 2 is the freeze on new off licenses in high deprivation areas. So that's no new off licenses in areas where there's a deprivation score of 8, 9 or 10. This is to reduce the disproportionate levels of alcohol-related harm experienced by high deprivation communities in response to community concerns about the proliferation of venues in this area. And so the freeze on new licenses will essentially aim to prevent further concentration of off licenses in these areas. There is an exemption available for this policy, which is the primary purpose exemption, as was consulted on, which is around you can apply for an exemption if the primary purpose of your business is not the sale and supply of alcohol. And then policy 3, which is restricting new bottle stores from locating near sensitive sites. So this is no new bottle stores near primary schools, secondary schools, or addiction and rehabilitation facilities. This is to minimise exposure to alcohol to potentially vulnerable populations, and the community preferences and our early engagement was strong on this one. For this policy, there is an exclusion for the city centre zone, which is that part right in the middle of the centre. There's also an exemption available for applicants who can show that they have engaged with the community and are taking actions to try and mitigate any concerns that are raised. And finally, on the bottom of that slide, there are the different locations to which the sensitive sites policy applies. So that's 50 metres in the Banks Peninsula for both schools and addiction facilities. In the central city, it's 50 metres for schools and 100 metres for addiction facilities, and the rest of Christchurch is 200 metres to both of those facilities. This slide is just a reminder essentially about the key considerations that staff use to help develop the LAP, and we suggest it might be useful that you keep these in mind too when discussing policy options today. The main one is that the policy remains consistent with the legislation and within scope of the LAP. But you can also consider the evidence, the community preferences, whether the policy is a proportionate response to alcohol-related harm, and the practicality of the policy as well. You saw this slide at the beginning of the hearings, but I'll quickly recap. So for the consultation process, we received 415 submissions, 366 from individuals, 49 from organisations, 5 community boards, 6 other community groups, and 40 from on and off licence holders. So this is the overall response from the consultation on all 3 policies. And I'll go through each of the policies individually in a moment. So across all 3 policies, there was a majority of support. These numbers are consistent with what we have heard to date throughout our previous surveying as well. And as mentioned earlier, staff developed the draft LAP reflecting the stakeholder and community engagement to date. And we considered that the earlier testing of issues and options has helped us refine and form a draft LAP that is generally supported by the community. And based on these results, we think that if councillors choose to adopt the policy as consulted on, you would have some confidence that it would be supported by the community. Into each policy. So policy 1 is about reducing off-licence trading hours. So you'll see for this policy, 57% of people supported the policy, 9 supported it in part, and 34% didn't. For those that did support the policy, there were concerns about the availability of alcohol, with many commenting that it is readily available and it's about time something was done. Concern also tended to centre around people being able to purchase more alcohol to continue drinking in unsupervised settings when they had already been drinking and may have impaired decision making. So that is essentially around late night top-ups for unsupervised drinking. And people also supported settings that would help reduce harm and make communities safer. Submitters who offered suggestions tended to support the intent of the policy, but offered more nuanced or conditional feedback. This tended to focus on changes to the proposed settings. So, for example, applying different hours that they would close, or addressing the issue of remote sales. You will note the ratio of submitters who suggested change. So for every 7 submitters who just supported the policy, 1 suggested a change to the policy be made. Generally, those who opposed the policy saw the LAP in general as an overreach from council, questioning why the council needed to intervene in decisions that are being made by adults. This was a recurring theme across all 3 policies. Some were also concerned about the potential loss of flexibility about when alcohol could be purchased. For policy 2, for this policy, 63% of people supported the policy as consulted on, another 10% supported it in part, and 24% of people did not support it. But for those that supported the policy, again, there was concern about the availability of alcohol causing harm and that there were already enough places to purchase it. Supporters tended to think that the right thing to do was to protect vulnerable communities, and they supported the focus on high deprivation areas. Submitters who supported the policy in part, again, tended to support the intent of the policy, but preferred a more nuanced approach to defining the areas of high deprivation. With this policy, we also note that for every 10 submitters that supported it, only 1 suggested an alternative. Those who opposed the policy were concerned that it was discriminatory and unfairly targeting high deprivation communities, or they simply thought that would be ineffective in reducing alcohol-related harm. Submitters provided a small amount of mixed feedback on the proposed exemption, the primary purpose exemption. The feedback received largely focused on the primary purpose exemption. And so while some supported the intent of the exemption, others thought that it did undermine the intent of the policy as well. And for policy 3, for this policy, we asked questions for each of the 3 different settings. So for Christchurch, for the Banks Peninsula, and for the Central City. First slide on the screen there shows the response to the Christchurch city settings. So not Banks Peninsula or the Central City. For this, 64% of people supported the proposal, 13 supported it in part, and just 20% did not. For those that supported the policy, as with policies 1 and 2, many submitters agreed in principle with the need to reduce alcohol-related harm, particularly near schools and addiction and rehabilitation centres. And they were supportive of the underlying objective of protecting vulnerable members of the community. In their view, it is reasonable to limit exposure to young people and people in recovery of alcohol. Some thought that the changes could be made to the proposed settings, but generally these submitters also supported the intent of the policy and what it's trying to achieve. Some submitters wanted to see the policy made more restrictive by adding an additional sensitive sites, for example, early childhood centres, public transport hubs, and the University of Canterbury. The ratio for this one of who supported the policy was 8 people supported the policy for every 1 person that provided an alternative suggestion. Some submitters questioned whether the policy would have any impact, and others thought that the existing rules around the sale and supply of alcohol should be enough to protect young people. And these are the results for the Central City and for the Banks Peninsula. So in relation to the Central City, 63% was supportive, 12 in part, and 21 opposed. And for
just about the same.
Banks Peninsula, 64% supported the policy, 10 in part, and 21% opposed. So these the results across all 3 settings for policy 3 were all very consistent. Much of the general sentiment that I just mentioned for Christchurch applies to these areas as well. In regards to the Central City specifically, those supporting the different settings did note the area's unique role in the environment compared to the rest of the city. Others thought that the Central City should be no different to the rest of the city, as people in this area wouldn't have the same protections as people in other parts of the city. And some also mentioned the exclusion of the city centre zone, CCZ. Some thought it was good to allow bottle stores in this area, but others thought the CCZ exclusion undermines the policy. And in regards to Banks Peninsula, most submitters supported the settings for Banks Peninsula, and those who did support the policy tended to acknowledge that there was still a need to protect vulnerable members of the community there, but that there was a need to consider the unique needs in the different areas rather than having a one-size-fits-all rule across all the district. And many thought that the 50-metre distance was reasonable for these areas. So there's a lot of information there. So just to summarise what we heard, overall, most submitters supported the proposed settings, viewing them as balanced and proportionate. There is a strong desire to reduce alcohol-related harm in our communities and protect vulnerable members of our community. Ease of access to alcohol and the hours of availability and its widespread availability across the city is a concern for many people. Submitters provided a broad range of views on the extent to which the LAP should restrict the sale and supply of alcohol, both for and against. So submitters who supported the LAP in part generally supported the intent of the policy, but just called for stronger, more restrictive conditions in certain areas. And opposition was primarily driven by scepticism around the effectiveness of or the need for an LAP. So that summarises the results of the consultation, and I might just pause there.
Okay, we have 3 questions at this stage, and then we'll answer those if you wouldn't mind, and then we'll go to excluded after that. So first up, Tyler.
I'll leave the remote stuff for public. The question I've got is around the walkable catchments.
Yes.
Is that doable?
It's possible, but we don't recommend doing the walkable catchments. So we think the way that we've done our catchments, this is for the sensitive sites you're talking about. Yeah. So the way that we've applied it is 200 metres from the boundary of any property. So that's sort of as the crow flies, so to speak. So we just put a ring around 200 metres from those boundaries. We think that's probably the best way to apply the policy for a couple of reasons. One, that you would more likely make sure that you're capturing everything that is close to that site, but also it's very administratively difficult for us to, for every sensitive site, understand what is walkable from each site and where those things are. It's a lot easier and simpler for both us and the public to understand where that 200 metres is. Yeah. With that one, it might work easier for towns and cities that are smaller, but if we have a lot of sensitive sites, it's a really complex way to do it.
The next question's around the public transport infrastructure, particularly the bus exchange and the Riccarton interchange. I know that the bus exchange in the city is bound, or will be bound with the CCZ, which we've put in. So we can't put a restriction on the bus interchange in the city, can we, if the CCZ is in place?
Yeah, you would have to remove that exclusion of the CCZ, essentially. So you can
just
do.
clarify, we're going to be discussing all these in the next part.
Oh yes, that is
Oh,
right.
gotcha.
Yeah,
Apologies.
Yeah,
I'll ask that next one.
yeah, because there's some sides to support it as well, so it'll be just a bit more of a coherent.
Yep, no, that's fine. I'll wait for the next one. Yep.
Mark, please.
I think mine falls into that.
Yeah.
Thank you. The just on the Banks Peninsula chart, the what was the number of respondents?
Many. Banks Peninsula, I can check if you give me a moment, but it was the.
You can count them on the fingers of both
It
hands.
was the least of all the wards in Christchurch.
Would it be fair to say it was less than 10?
I'll have to check. It could be.
Not entirely. It's good.
It's interesting it came out the same
It is.
as the city. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. It looks like 8.
Good cross section. Did you say 8?
I think I know them all personally.
Because I'm that deep in.
Thank you. I'm on slide 4 with next steps. If someone or an organisation were to judicially review, where would that happen in that timeline?
Anytime, I believe. I think
Anytime after the decision or after the adoption, where would that fit in?
The Act was amended in 2023 to remove the right to appeal. The judicial review is a separate thing. I think we're not aware of any time period in which it could or could not apply. I think but it may be treated differently if
time period, and when would it be?
Usually no time period to review, no exclusion, they could take it at any time. So it'd be following the decision at some stage after that.
Any time.
Okay, so other than a judicial review, once the council's made the decision on the finalised LAP, decision point, is there anything other than a judicial review that could derail the adoption of it? No, so if approved, the public notification and the adoption and the commencement of is just pro forma, matter of course, and there is nothing, no further decision points or anything that can derail it once the decision has been made.
That's right. So yeah, those final few steps are set out in legislation that
Right.
is required. So once that decision is made, we have to publicly notify, which would happen, a day or two after. Then there's that 30 days, it becomes formally adopted at that stage, which is that adoption stage. And then, the LAP itself will have dates on it when it would commence, and
Yes, I
that's
understand.
also as part of the process.
I was just trying to understand when that judicial review period would be and when we get over that risk. Thank you.
And Pauline.
Oh, yes, I'm not sure if this is for now or the next session, so I'll ask it now as well. We questioned the high deprivation area identification and how we need to regularly review that. And the response is that would be done as part of the 5-yearly census. But now we've heard the census is going to be discontinued. So where does that leave us in identifying the high deprivation areas? How would we do it?
Yeah. So our advice on that one is that we would, it's probably better to think about it by the time we review it. So we would review the policy within 6 years. When we review the policy, that's the stage where we could look at whether there's data to update the high deprivation areas. From my understanding around the census data, and unfortunately Amy's not here who's our expert, but from my understanding on the census data, there will be population data still coming out to some extent. On what extent that I'm not sure, and how that will time in with reviews. But essentially, it'd be the time of us reviewing the policy that we would go back and check that most up-to-date data.
So there is your response to the concerns on having some method to regularly update that, like not 5-yearly, but more often because of the changing dynamics of the city. There's no way to really do that.
So we would recommend against doing that anyway, just because if we are regularly changing the maps, it actually becomes really difficult for people to understand where they can and can't open a business, or whether the community can understand if a bottle store is or is not going to open up in their community. If we're often changing the map, so we think it's a better way to sort of stick with the maps until we review it. We can then update the maps, and they'll become the maps going forward until next time.
Thank you.
So is there anything in here that affects the renewal of a license? So because we're focused here on no new off licenses, and then all of this references the new off licenses. So, and does this impact a renewal of an existing?
So the idea with the LAP is that licenses that are currently in place will be able to renew them. So this is all about focusing on new licenses.
Okay, so when someone renews, I recall reading in one of the documents somewhere, and it might be in PX, there was a reference to some conditions that can be attached to a license or a new license that could cover some of the concerns that people may have. Can new conditions be attached to a renewal?
Yes, yeah. So that's up to the DLC's discretion if they. So when the license comes up for a renewal, they can attach conditions at any time.
New conditions, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So that can happen in situations where maybe there's been a few issues with a certain venue, and then it comes up for renewal. They might attach some. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's good. Right. Well, Celeste.
In regards to looking at the map for the high deprivation areas, if someone was to apply for a license and they were able to present information that showed that an area had changed, is that something that's taken into consideration? Is there an exception there for 6 years? Is quite a long time for some suburbs.
Yes. No. So the only exemption that's in place for that is around the primary schools. So the DLC can, they do have the discretion not to follow the LAP in circumstances when they think it's not appropriate to follow it. So it is possible, and they would probably just have to argue their case, but in terms of what the clauses are and things in the LAP.
Okay, thanks. And then we,
How open to better word, bastardisation is the primary purpose open to, like, could we, for example, see bottle stores that have a basket of fruit in there? Would they?
No, so they do have to provide evidence that it is not their primary purpose. So, I mean, as the decision for the DLC, I would like to think that if they had a basket of fruits, they wouldn't buy that argument. But yeah, they do have to provide some sort of evidence that it's not.
That's very good, everyone. Right, we're going to move into P, public excluded. I'm happy to move it, and Melanie's happy to second it. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you. Against? Thank you. That's carried. So it gives us a few minutes to clear the room, and we'll get back into it.
council would like to amend. And there are some question prompts at the bottom of the slide there to help with that. But essentially, this is over to councillors to discuss and have it answered. Perhaps if we start with policy 1.
Yeah, do it by policy.
Yeah, no, that's right, yeah. Right, so is everyone generally happy with the fantastic information and presentation that we've had, or would someone like to put up a amendment to that number 1? Everyone's relatively happy. Do I just have a or at this stage no one wants to put anything up for policy 1, so we're all generally happy with policy 1?
Yep.
Okay.
View, but I'm very much outnumbered, so.
Okay, that's fine. So policy 1, take that one off. And now we'll go to the policy 2 one, which is questions down the bottom. Has anybody got any burning issues on what they might want to change on policy 2? Mel? Andre? Wait, mate.
So on policy 2, I would be interested in changing the height deprivation area from deciles 8 to 10 to 7 to 10. And I would also like to remove the exemption for supermarkets around primary purpose.
How does that affect things, Tom?
Well, that's possible. I can show you a map of what deprivation level 7 looks like to begin with, if you like. Oops. That's what deprivation 7 looks like. So I'll take you back a couple of slides. This might be the best way to do it. This is what it is now on the screen, deprivation 8, 9 and 10. So the area in red is the areas where considering high deprivation for this policy. That's what it looks like now. That's what it looks like adding 7 to 10. So it does add a bit, and it starts to encroach a little bit on the central city there. Fills a couple of the gaps that were around on 8 to 10 as well. If councillors want to do this, I know that there's been discussion around adding the buffer zone as well. I would suggest you would either choose one or the other.
Yeah, well, we need to, we haven't all discussed it yet, so.
It's 7 to 10, is it?
No,
It's
7 to 10.
What does 8 to 10 look like again?
So, sorry, Mel, what are you generally saying you are not happy with the original one and you want to make it bigger?
Yeah, include 7.
It was a number of the submitters came in and asked us to either put in the buffer zone or add in decile 7. Decile 7 makes more sense.
So if someone wanted to put in a buffer zone instead, would that then be a foreshadowing?
I'm open to something.
Could we keep it at 8?
Yeah, that's
Well, let's have a look at all the maps because we haven't all discussed it yet, have we?
No, we haven't.
John,
No, so maybe we go through the buffer now as well, so we
Yeah, this all
understand.
should have been presented first, Mark.
So I'm keen to understand what staff's view
Okay,
is
this is the
on.
buffer.
But
So this is deprivation 8 to 10 with a 500 metre buffer. How it would look, so the shaded part would be added.
that's a good question.
That's deprivation level
Which one covers more area and what would you recommend out of the two if we were to choose one or the other?
Yeah, definitely.
7 appears to be more area.
7 would cover more area. It starts to get into the, you see there, the sort of eastern side of the central city, the eastern side of the 4 ads, and fills in a few of the holes, but so does the buffer zone, fills in some of those holes as well.
Buffer does fill in the whole stuff up the
The buffer's more flexible, isn't it? And
So I'm keen to understand what staff's
Yeah.
advice would be around that, recognising that the ultimate decision is ours.
Well, our advice would be to stick with the 8 and 10 and have the clause that the DLC that is in the draft, which is that the DLC can they can at their discretion they can if someone's opening up close to or over the road from a deprivation area, they can use that as a reason to essentially decline an application.
Well, couldn't you rephrase that as using the buffer as a discretionary area?
It's already
I actually prefer what staff recommended.
I would
Sorry,
suggest it depends on what.
Now, one at a time, one at a time.
It might depend on what you were trying to achieve with each policy. So policy 7 would probably cover more area. And if you want to cover more area by the policy, that's what that would achieve. But the idea of the buffer zone was put forward in hearings to try and stop the people setting up on the edge or across the road from the deprivation areas. So if that is, it depends if that is what councillors are trying to resolve.
Or we leave it as it is with the discretion of the DLC.
Yes.
And if, can I ask a question?
Yep.
And if the buffer is there, you still have people sitting up on the edge of the buffer and the discretion.
A new edge.
You're shifting the
You have
buffer.
a new edge, but the discretion would still exist with the DLC.
We would suggest taking out the clause. So, yeah, it's our advice is to, if you're going to add the buffer, to then take out the clause. There are two policies that are trying to do the same thing, so I think we clean to do one.
But if you put in the buffer, you will just move the edge.
Yes.
Which is why you recommend to keep the discretion in with the DLC. Thank you.
So that's okay.
Yes, but the edge is no longer in a high deprivation area when it's got a 5.
If we're not careful, we'll have the whole city. Okay, have you got all your questions answered, Mel?
Yeah. Well, could the buffer be changed like to 200 metres? We can do any distance we like.
Yes, but I wouldn't do any more than 500.
No, I'm not saying we do more. I was thinking more like a 200 or.
It's possible.
So the question then, follow-up question from that is, if we reduce it to 200 for a buffer, would you still recommend that we then no longer have the discretion with the DLC?
Yeah, I recommend removing the clause. I think our advice is to either have the clause.
One or the other?
Yes, yeah.
I wanted to capitalise on Pauline's question was, could the buffer be a discretionary area?
That's a good question.
Discretionary area.
So an area for the DLC to use discretion. Because it's clear for both the applicant and the DLC, because they know that they may or may not be approved, depending on it.
At the moment, the clause refers to the DLC may consider, and Arla may consider whether issuing the license would, in its opinion, contribute to the further concentration of licensed premises servicing high deprivation areas. A discretionary buffer zone would be a place on a map, whereas the clause is not so constrained, so restricted to where in the district you're talking about.
So I think, for example, just to elaborate on Philip's point, they might consider, if we had say a 200 metre buffer, there might be a place 250 metres away that under the clause, the DLC could say, well, actually, we still be servicing this area of deprivation.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, so it's,
So bigger buffer better. If you're going to do one.
Yep.
Sorry.
No, good, I'm happy to.
That's good.
Pauline, and then Andre, and then we'll get into making of some. Your question?
I can't remember what it was.
You've been in the area.
Oh,
of
no, I
deprivation.
can. It was Mel's one. Yeah.
Okay, Andre.
Thank you. Yeah, mine's purely around two different rules for two neighbouring supermarkets in North Hornsby.
Okay, so Tom, can you digest what you've just heard and what do you suggest?
As I understand it, the councillors are comfortable with sticking with what was consulted on with the clause.
We should have a vote. This is weird, this thing that we don't.
Yeah, but I want to know exactly what we're going, are we going with 8 and a buffer or 7 and no buffer?
I think that's what I think everyone needs to vote on.
Yeah.
I think staff's advice is stick with 7 with the clause.
Stick with 7 with
8. Sorry.
8 with the clause. Okay. So, do I put that?
Yes.
Okay, we
Shall
don't
we
need
vote?
a second or anything like that.
We've got two options, which is
Seven
normal.
and
Is this a decision-making
No, it is, it's a hearings panel.
We're in a decision-making hearing
Yeah,
now,
it's a hearings panel.
which is confused by a decision-making point at a later time.
Yeah.
It's just weird.
Right,
Okay,
This is what we're asking them to put in.
so we're gonna
the
vote on
draft.
the recommendation for staff,
It's like we
we're
did with the
voting on
dogs.
Mel's amendment.
First on the recommendation by staff.
Okay,
okay, so
You have to put
Was it?
amendment as well.
Let's put amendments
Oh.
first.
Okay, the amendment
Could
first.
you just give us 1 second?
yeah, okay, here we go.
How about we get some?
Yeah, right, 5 minutes, everyone.
And we also need them in writing.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna be ducking out for half an hour. So
Yeah,
if
yeah,
they
yeah,
can
you had that
vote,
there.
hey, do it when I get back, or, I mean, do it without me, but, yeah. Yeah. It's not the final vote anyway, so.
It's a type 5 or would it be 5?
I'm a bit confused because it's like
Thank you, everybody. We've got, say, policy 1 across the line, that's no problem. We have got some amendments that are floating around for policy 2 and maybe policy 3. We haven't seen those yet. But to stop things getting messy and trying to do things on the fly, I'm going to ask anyone that's got an amendment of any sort, put it through as written. Staff will evaluate it and we will come back we'll adjourn till the 30th of June and then we'll go through it just like we do, say, an annual plan. Yes, no, there won't be many of them and we'll get it done. But just written amendments and then we can get advice on it and evaluate it ourselves. So that's what I'm suggesting. Does that make sense to you, Tom, down your end? Okay, all right?
Yes.
Okay, so anyone, I don't know who you put them into, someone.
Natasha.
Yeah.
Send it to Natasha by what day? What day is that?
25th. No, voting today.
Oh, 25th?
Yes.
Okay, so if everyone can have their written submissions in by the 25th to Natasha, she'll evaluate them, throw them all out there, and we'll get them the day or so before. Everyone will get them the same.
Yes.
And then on the day, we can go down, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and bang, we'll have a decision. Is that okay? Right. So, we're adjourning the,
Yes, you should do policy 3.
to see if there's any questions.
Yeah.
Okay, to give us a feel for what's maybe happening. Okay, is that all right? So can we put the policy 3.1 up again with the wee questions you had underneath it? And, there we go. This one's here. All right. Okay, Tyler's got a question on that.
I wanted to, and resent it, but around sensitive sites and adding to some of those. Celeste brought up a really good thought of the Christchurch Youth Hub and the city mission. Wondering if those are already included. If not, I'd love to add those. And also the Riccarton bus lounge and the bus interchange if we don't follow through on the CCZ.
So these more or less are you're just voicing what you will put in.
Sensitive sites.
That's good. No, it's good to put them all out there. That's
Can I
cool.
ask a question on that?
You're good, Vic? Yeah.
So how does that impact the CCZ then? Is it one or the other? So if these sensitive sites are broadened to include the ones that you're recommending, need to understand staff's advice, or is that what we're going to wait for the impact of that is? Because it may well be that it has to be one or the other. And it might mean that there is then no point to the CCZ. I can't join the dots on that, sorry.
So it would be the case for the bus exchange in the city. That is within the CCZ. So if you did want to include that as a sensitive site, you would remove the exclusion of the CCZ.
Okay, so the question then follows, can you keep the CCZ with the exclusion of us? Can you have both?
Technically, yes, but I would say we prefer not to.
Okay.
We're starting to get into quite
deep.
Yeah.
I guess one observation or comment I would make is that the more we chip away into different aspects of the policy, the more complicated it gets, and the less sort of helpful it becomes. And so we did hear in consultation some ideas for a range of different sensitive sites. So people wanted us to apply to all parks, churches, and that sort of thing. Previously we haven't. There are a lot of things that people would like. The ones that we have landed on are the ones that we think are the most sort of proportionate and practical response to those. If we do start adding in particular ones, we may be able to do that, but you do also sort of start to open up another sort of potentially kind of avoidance about what we include.
So does there have to have been some evidence raised or submission points on the additional sensitive sites that an amendment may be seeking to include? So like the examples that Tyler's just given, if no one in the submissions raised those as being a problem, can we include that as an amendment, say?
Yeah, so the only ones that, well, the only sites that asked to be included was the University of Canterbury. No ECEs, for instance, asked to be included as a sensitive site. And neither did the other ones that I think you've mentioned. So, yeah, we'll provide advice on that maybe next time.
Thank you.
Anyone else on those questions? So that is all I'm hearing that could be being asked for this area here. Okay. Cool. Excellent. So we're. Are you coughing or you put your hand up?
About the UC, I will put that up as an amendment for a sensitive site and no special sectoral city zone as suggested by the police.
Okay.
As a what?
As suggested by the police.
No CCC.
So it sounds like going forward, we'll come back on the 30th of June after Natasha's got in all the written ones by the 25th, and we'll get them before the 30th of June. And then we'll go down them one by one, yay, nay, or otherwise, and then we'll get to an end date. So that will be good. So
And the amendments will require seconder?
if yes, everyone that puts, please, when you put your amendment in, if you can, have a seconder with it so that we're not running around on the day looking a bit daft. So we don't, because we're not finishing the meeting, we don't need a hearing here.
Nice. We're just going to adjourn until 11 AM on the 30th.
11 AM on the 30th. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Tim will move it, Pauline will second it. All those for that, please say aye. Against, thank you, that's carried. Right, we're done. Yes. Thank you very much and great work you